Hey, greetings, Leonard Streets Covenant Church. Man, this week has been so full of different news sources coming in and out about gatherings and when we can gather and what's allowed and what isn't allowed. I just wanted to help bring some clarity to our congregation because I know in all this ambiguity, it's really difficult to make heads or tails of what's true and what's going on. So I want to address that this past week, President Trump made some comments that he would support reopening of houses of worship across the country, regardless of what state and local leadership was suggesting in their policies. So I've had numerous inquiries from inside and outside the congregation with regard to my stance on the president's statement. And I think that the way I want to answer that is part of what makes us a healthy church is that I don't operate in a vacuum. We don't have a leadership structure where the pastor is the benevolent dictator of everything. So I work within a leadership team, and we as a leadership team and pastors seek input from prayerful reflection on the scriptures. We seek input from our staff, our denominational leaders, and then our local and state governing bodies. So ultimately, no matter what input and advice I receive, I feel like I'm accountable to Jesus, and so is our leadership team. And so with that said, we hold this task with the utmost reverence and humility, and none of us has ever led through a crisis such as this because no one has led through a crisis such as this. What we do know is that people are hurting. People that we love are lonely and isolated. People that we have vowed to serve as officers and leaders in the church are suffering from losses of loved ones, and people are unable to grieve with the gathered church community. And as your pastor and as a representative of the leadership of the church, I want you to know that I hear you. I hear the desire to get together again and to exercise our right to worship and to pray and to fellowship in person. And I personally long for the day when we can safely gather. But that day hasn't quite yet arrived. Now, because our leadership team and I hold our task with such reverence, and we also are taking lots of other factors into consideration. After all, just because something is legal or permitted doesn't make it good or moral or Christ-like. And so after discussing things with the leadership team, there are many reasons why we're not going to be opening up the church building for public gatherings at this point in time. But I'm just going to list 4 for some simplicity's sake in this moment. And the first one is that I think it's a mark of Christ-likeness for us to consider the most vulnerable among us. Many of our congregants are either immunocompromised or they're living with people who are immunocompromised. And on top of all that, we have a relatively high percentage of frontline workers who are not only exposed to the COVID-19 pandemic, but they're also bringing that home and potentially exposing their family members, any which one of whom could be a carrier. So we start getting groups of people together who have had contact on a regular basis with frontline workers, and we could be in for a huge mess. Second, I think we should really try and honor the sacrifices being made by those in our congregation who are making huge sacrifices to help maintain essential services while working to flatten the curve of infection rates. What does it say? What message does it communicate to the people in our church who are medics or medical professionals or store clerks or people working in the WTA or the trades, people that are putting themselves out there at high risk? If we just start to gather in opposition to the scientific data that suggests it's really too soon. And what does it say to our teachers and our workers who are removed from their ideal setting of work or removed from their work altogether if we don't stand with them in a sort of solidarity? We need to be the church together. And thirdly, what is our relationship as a church to the local and state governing authorities? Our state leaders are not asking us to bow down to idols, to Baal. They're asking us to be part of a community to flatten the curve. Right or wrong and how they're doing it, I'm sure it'll be critiqued until the day we die. I do not envy the task of our leaders in our city or state level or national level throughout this pandemic. So I encourage us to pray for them now. We are to respect the governing authorities and to pray for them up until the time that they're calling us to live a life in contradiction to following Jesus. So we may not be able to gather for health and safety reasons, but we are the church, and that has never been called into question. And finally, I really think we should consider our witness to the wider world. Even if we were to rush back together and nothing happens, what would have been lost by just waiting another month or so when we get the green light from the scientific community and local leaders? Alternatively, what would it say to the world if we rushed into things and then we were part of fostering a second wave or even a localized outbreak? I always think of how I feel as a Christian and as a Christian leader when I read in the news about yet another church in some other place or some other state that tried to defy the laws, and then their whole church got sick, people died, or they spread it around the community. I want to be a part of the blessing of our world, not part of the curse. So at this point, the leadership team and I deem it unwise to attempt opening the doors for worship gatherings. But I do want to leave us with two positives to consider. First of all, the lead team and staff are diligently making preparations for the time when we can gather, even in a limited capacity. In fact, just on Wednesday, Governor Jay Inslee came out with some new guidelines for religious gatherings in particular. Right now, we're in phase 1, and apparently if we had a massive property, we could meet up to 100 people outside, but that's not really a reality for us in Leonard Streets. But in phase 2, we can start to have smaller gatherings of less than 50 people. And so we're working now to try and figure out how we can do that safely, who can be involved. We're getting safety equipment all lined up. So we are making preparations so when the day comes, we can safely do that together. Second, the church has never really been closed. You know, before the stay-at-home order, that kind of statement was usually just kind of pastor speak, kind of akin to my pet peeves of talking about the church as a people and not a building. But this new reality that we're living in has really turned that ecclesiological concept into a functional reality. We are the church, whether or not we gather on Sundays in a church or in homes or by ourselves. Yes, ideally, we would gather for worship. And yes, over the long run, we were made to make disciples in community, not over computers, and not over conversations from across the street. And the time will come when we will get back together, and we will heal together, and we will grow together. But in the words of the story of Esther, who is to say that we were not called to be the church scattered for such a time as this? I take great comfort in knowing and reminding myself and us that Jesus knew it would be you and I who make up Leonard Street's Covenant Church in 2020. Jesus knew that we would be facing this pandemic together. Jesus knew that there would be suffering and inconvenience and sadly even loss of life. And I also believe that Jesus is leading us to lessons and conversations and points of growth that we may not have otherwise experienced. So take heart. We are the church, the body of Jesus. No building, no government, no virus. Nothing can change that reality. May the peace of Christ be with you.